Right then, welcome to Social Influence. This is the first lesson on social influence, and we're looking at the work of Asch, who's a really respected and well-known psychologist. This study that we're looking at is a really key study in the history of psychology. It was a really pivotal study that's been really well known and influential. So this is all about conformity, which is about how we change our behaviour to fit with other people around us, a bit like peer pressure. It can be a change in behaviour or opinions as a result of other people. So if you think about different groups that you might belong to, there might be like a college friends group, there might be like a family group. You would change your behaviour in various different ways to fit with both of those groups. It might be like in terms of what you're wearing, or what you what opinion you're giving about something. And many other things, many other ways that we change the way that we act, or the things that we say as a result of what we think other people want us to do, or as a result of something that everyone else in a group is saying. Okay, so here's what Asch did. He said to his participants, "You're going to take part in some research on vision. I would just like you to say which one of these 3 lines is the same as the first line, so Exhibit 1. So in this case, hopefully you can see that Exhibit 1 is the same length as line A. That's meant to be really, really clear with no room for doubt. So even if you wouldn't be exactly sure that it was completely the same length, clearly Exhibit 1 is nowhere near B or C. It's definitely meant to be closest to A. So it's meant to be really, really clear that it's the same. Right, but it's obviously not research on vision. It's research, this experiment is about conformity. So what he did was he had a load of accomplices taking part in this as fake participants. So he would have a line of, like, say, a group of 8. 7 of them were his accomplices that he primed beforehand. And what he did was he gave them something like this and said, which of the 3 lines is the same as line X? He seats the participants second last in the order and then goes from the beginning. First participant says, the answer is C. Second participant says C. Third says C. Fourth says C. And so on until it gets to the real accomplice. And all this time the real accomplice is thinking, really, it's not the same length as C. Why is everyone saying it's the same length as C? What shall I say? And what he wants to know is, will that person give in to the group pressure, and will they say C as well when it's clearly not C, just to fit in and avoid looking silly. So yeah, those were called the critical trials. They had 18 trials each participant. They were called trials, each one of these things that they were shown. And on 12 of them, they were critical trials. That just means on the critical trials, those were the ones where everyone gave the wrong answer. So that was the ones they were really interested in, to see what the participant would do on those trials. Okay, so what did he find? This first figure is often misunderstood. Make sure you understand what it means. So it 36.8% conformity rate on all of the critical trials. So if Asch took all of the 12 critical trials for every participant across all of his trials, and the number of times people conformed, that's the percentage. So 36.8% conformity rate out of all the critical trials which took place. 74% of participants conformed at least once, and 26% never conformed at all. They didn't conform, always just gave the correct answer, no matter what other people said. So that's interesting findings. Don't know what you think of that. Seems like, given how obvious the correct answer is, 36.8% of critical trials getting a conforming response is actually quite high, 1 in 3. So why did they conform is the next question. And Asch actually interviewed his participants afterwards to find out why they conformed, and many of them said that they just couldn't bear to risk being rejected. They wanted to have to be accepted by the rest of the group, and that's known as normative social influence. We'll look at that in another lesson. So the conclusion that Asch drew was that even in really unambiguous, i.e. really clear situations, there might be really strong group pressure to perform, especially if the group is a unanimous majority. Unanimous just means that everyone's saying the same thing. So he did some other trials as well, where he was looking at what happens if this person gives the correct answer but everyone else gives the wrong answer and stuff like that. The original experiment he was looking at, everyone was unanimous, everyone gave the wrong answer, and then they were wanted to see what the participant was doing. And he also concluded that some people were conforming because of what's called normative social influence, where they're trying to avoid rejection. Okay, let's move on to evaluation then. So imagine you had this question: describe 2 ethical issues in conformity research. There's a number of things you could talk about with this experiment, and I'm sure actually many of you can spot these already. First issue is protection from harm. Actually, if you want to challenge yourself, pause the video now and think about these 4 things. What issues can you see, and what did they do well? Did they deal with them well? So pause the video now if you want to challenge yourself and see if you can work it out. Okay, now, so protection from harm was an issue because you're subjecting participants to a level of stress, and because also you're potentially embarrassing them. They're feeling embarrassed to give the correct answer. So embarrassment is something that people don't necessarily think of under protection from harm, but it could come under protection from psychological harm. Consent is another issue. That's because they were deceived. So these 2 next issues go together. They were deceived because they were told it was an experiment on vision, and so they couldn't give fully informed consent. And actually other studies have called that into question, and there was another study that ran it but told them the true aims of the study to start with, and they still got similar conformity rates. So you've got to question, why did Asch really need to do that? Was it really necessary? And I'm sure Asch would have argued that actually if he told people that was what he was looking at, he wouldn't get their natural response. That would have been his comeback to that criticism. And then actually the thing that he did really well was debriefing. He debriefed all the participants afterwards, explained the full aims, and got really detailed information from them about it. So that doesn't make it okay for him to use deception, but it's one way of dealing with it and also offering them any support that they might need afterwards. And it's one thing that you could say that he's done well in terms of ethics. Okay, so just to reiterate that, we've got this particular study, Bogdanov, actually put participants in an Asch-like task and found that yes, they were stressed. So this is support for the idea that Asch is causing stress to his participants, that they had a high heart rate, high blood pressure and so on. Right, let's look at other evaluation issues. So first of all, the sample. You've got male undergraduates. It's an opportunity sample. So we could ask questions about that to start with, criticise that in terms of generalisability, population validity and so on. Time. It was carried out in the 1950s. That's been questioned as well because actually, when it's been replicated more recently by Perrin and Spencer, they found that far fewer participants conformed. And actually, 1950s America was a highly conformist society, far more than it is now. We value diversity a lot more now than it was valued at the time. So we could question whether it has temporal validity, whether you could really take the results from then and apply them to now. That's a big question, really. Culture as well. it was carried out in the US. We can take that further because the US is an individualistic culture. That's likely to affect conformity rates. It's likely to mean that if it was carried out in perhaps a collectivist culture, we'd be likely to get higher conformity rates because conformity is valued more highly in those cultures. So it means that doesn't necessarily have external validity to be generalized to many different cultures. It lacks generalizability again. The validity about this, we've mentioned various different types of validity there: population validity, temporal validity. The other thing we can say is that actually it has good internal validity because it's highly controlled. It's a lab experiment, and it means that it can be replicated and that we can check reliability, which is really good. Ecological validity we haven't mentioned, but could also be questioned because it's carried out in a lab. The other thing is task realism. It's not a term we've used very much yet, but if you think back to that picture of the lines that the participants were shown, actually, how often really in real life do we have to judge something like that? It's not really a task that relates to stuff that we do in everyday life, is it? So it can be criticised on that ground. It would be more helpful to have an experiment where we're doing something that's more related to the sorts of judgments and stuff that we have to do in everyday life in group situations. So I've just put details here of some of the studies that I've just talked about. So Perrin and Spencer carried out Asch's study in 1981, and only one student conformed in 396 trials. Again, although you could question whether that was because you were using engineering students and the sort of task, they'd be very confident with that sort of task. But also it could be, so again we're questioning sample there, aren't we, of Asch's study, that perhaps his sample affected the results, perhaps the time period affected the results, so population and temporal validity. And then the artificial task, they know they're taking part in research, they might therefore change their behaviour as a result of what they think is expected of them, as we know, demand characteristics. And then also it's only men in the sample, so we can't generalise it to women. And it has been replicated with women, actually, and if you're interested you can Google that and find out what was found, whether women conform as much as men, and let me know in the comments on the task if you like. Okay, so that is Asch's study. So this week what I would like you to do is just an 8-mark question. Will only take 10 minutes. Just outline and evaluate research into conformity. I would suggest that you do this written and take a picture, but equally if you want to type it, actually that's probably easier for me to mark, so happy for either way for you to submit that. But outline and evaluate, I would like it submitted through the assignment on Teams, please. Evaluate research into conformity, that's 4 marks. I would expect 2 different points for that, really well expanded as a minimum. Okay?